Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. My name is Donna Will. I am the Professional Development Coordinator for the Maryland Department of Health's Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you today to our webinar on electronic visit verification exemption for live-in caregivers. Today we have Rhonda Workman, Director of Federal Programs, who will be sharing information with us. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to hear the webinar, by computer and by phone. If you look at the panel interface on your right labeled audio, you can click either computer or phone to switch for the best option. There is one handout for this webinar, which can be downloaded from the handout section. If you are listening by phone, you can request that they be emailed. We are recording the webinar and posting the session on YouTube and the DDA website. Today's PowerPoint has also been uploaded as an attachment and is available for you to download in the webinar panel box. Questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel, and we will get to those towards the end of the presentation. So now I'd like to introduce Rhonda Workman. Good morning.
Good morning, Donna. Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our electronic visit verification exemption for live-in caregivers webinar. I look forward to sharing with all of you an overview, including the DDA's exemption request process, attestation form, and address verification documents. We have also included some resources and links at the end of our presentation, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. Next slide, please. Electronic visit verification, or EVV, is a process that the federal government has put in place for clocking in and out in real time to verify that services are provided to the right person at the right time and in the right place. EVV requires direct support professionals to clock in and out in real time. Next slide, please. For the DDA-operated Medicaid waiver programs, EVV is required for personal supports and respite care services. The requirements apply to both the self-directed and traditional service delivery models. Traditional providers began using EVV for personal supports in October of 2020. All providers were using the Maryland Department of Health's EVV ISAS system by January of 2021. People self-directed services began using EVV on January 1st of 2023. Traditional providers will be using EVV for respite care services beginning on October 1st, 2023. Additional information related to EVV implementation for respite care services for traditional providers will be coming soon. Next slide, please. Today, we are happy to share information related to the Maryland Department of Health's option for people to request an exemption for their live-in caregiver EVV requirements. Live-in caregivers are individuals that live with the person and regularly provide personal support services or respite to them in their home. The DDA will review all requests for an exemption and inform the person if the request is approved. When a request is approved, the live-in caregiver does not have to clock in and out in real time. Please note that once approved, the live-in caregiver will need to follow the Financial Management and Counseling Services Agency's electronic billing process or the DDA traditional provider's timesheet process based on the service model the person is using. Next slide, please. This slide is a visual of the DDA's request process. People who choose to use the Live-in Caregiver exemption should inform their Coordinator of Community Services, or CCS. The CCS will submit the request to the DDA. The request must also include an attestation form and residency documents. Residency document means a document that includes information about the live-in caregiver's address. We will walk through and talk about both of these items in the upcoming slides. Once the DDA receives the request, we will review it and confirm if it meets the department standards within 20 business days or sooner. Today, we have already received and approved some requests. If information is missing or forms are not complete, the DDA will ask for more information. We will send an email to the CCS, the person, and the live-in caregiver. Once a determination has been made, an email determination notification will be sent to all people included on the request for which an email address was provided. Financial management and counseling service agencies and DDA traditional providers will also receive information for live-in caregivers that meet the standards. Once initially approved, that request must be submitted annually with residency documentation. Requests must be submitted 30 days prior to the annual expiration date. In addition, requests must be resubmitted when things change in terms of the following items. Anytime a person changes the provider or FMCS agency as applicable, anytime the live-in caregiver changes, anytime the live-in caregiver's address changes, and anytime the person's address changes. Next slide, please. This slide includes a screenshot of the DDA's request. The CCS completes and submits the exemption request utilizing the link that's provided in the guidance and at the end of this presentation. You can see that we capture some general information related to the CCS, the person, and also the caregiver. Next slide, please. The request includes additional questions based on the service delivery model the person is using. This slide shows the additional questions for the self-directed service model. It includes the name of the financial management and counseling service agency and also asks if the person has a support broker. If a support broker is indicated, their email will also be requested. Next slide, please. This slide shows the additional questions for traditional service model. They include the name of the provider that is providing the personal support or respite care services. The provider's email and Medicaid number is also requested. The CCS will use the provider's Medicaid number noted in the person-centered plan service authorization section. Next slide, please. This slide shows the section of the request where the residency documents are to be uploaded. The person or live-in caregiver shares documents with the CCS about the live-in caregiver's address. The CCS then uploads into the request in this section. Next slide, please. This slide shows the section of the request for the CCS checklist. The CCS completes the checklist after uploading the attestation form and residency documents into LTSS Maryland. Additional team members' emails can be noted in the request. If provided, these individuals will also receive the determination notification. Next slide, please. This slide is a screenshot of the attestation form. The CCS facilitates the completion of the DDA Live-in Caregiver Exemption Attestation Form. The form includes information related to the CCS, the person, including the DDA waiver program they're enrolled, their address, and their requested effective date for the exemption, the live-in caregiver's name and their address, and attestations from the person, the caregiver, and CCS related to this form. The form must be included with the DDA EVV Live-in Caregiver Exemption request that we just reviewed, and also must be uploaded into the person's client attachment section in LTSS. Next slide, please. Attestation forms are required on an annual basis along with the request. Exemption request effective dates can be as of July 1st, 2023 or later. The live-in caregiver exemption request and attestation form must be resubmitted under the following conditions. Anytime the person changes provider or FMCS agency, anytime the live-in caregiver changes, anytime the live-in caregiver address changes, and anytime the person's address change. Next slide, please. Acceptable residency verification documents are noted here on this slide. They include Real ID or other state-issued identifications, for example, Maryland driver's license, voter registration card, and photo identification, vehicle registration card, bank account statements, insurance card, utility bill, lease or mortgage statement, and cable or phone bill. Next slide, please. EVV is required for personal supports and respite care services only under the DDA operated waiver programs. The person can request an EVV exemption for the paid live-in caregiver. The CCS submits the exemption request. The request effective date can be July 1st or later. The request must include 2 address verification documents and the signed attestation form. An email determination notification will be sent to all people included in the request for which an email address was provided, and once approved, the request must be submitted annually with residency documents. This slide is a summary of the information that we've shared today and is a good reference tool that you can refer back to. Next slide, please. This slide shows resources related to the live-in caregiver. It includes the DDA's live-in caregiver exemption guidance that is posted on our website, the actual live-in caregiver exemption request link for the CCS to use, and also a link to the attestation form, which is a fillable form that is to be completed. Next slide, please. For questions about the live-in caregiver exemption, please contact your DDA regional office or the DDA's federal program unit at the new dedicated email address, dda.evv@maryland.gov. For questions about traditional services time entry through the use of the EVV mobile application, phone system, or manual time entries, please contact the LTSS billing unit at mdh.ltssbilling@maryland.gov. For questions about time entry for self-directed service model, please contact the participant and their financial management and counseling service agency. Next slide, please. And now we've come to our questions and answer section. We're going to check to see, Nova, are you able to assist with this? Are you able to call in? Okay, we were having a little bit of trouble with that, so we'll go ahead and start with our questions and answers. One of our question was, or is CDS staff already exempt from EVV real-time requirements. CDS staff don't have to fill out and request exemption. That is correct. CDS, or Community Development Services, are not an EVV required service. You will want to complete requirements for timesheets, for the self-directed model, or the traditional services. Our next question is, the CCS is away. However, we want to start using this method. I printed out the attestation form, the CCS attestation, DDA, EVV, live-in caregiver exemption requests, and additional questions associated with the self-directed model. Is this all we need? Could I have a staff fill all these out and then submit to CCS upon the return so this can be entered by CCS into LTSS system? Will this be retroactive to July 1st if approved? Great questions. So the answer is, first, yes. The approval can be retroactive to July 1st, 2023. If your CCS is not available, we recommend that you contact the CCS supervisor to see if they can assist you if you want to submit this request form while they're away. Again, the request form can be submitted when the CCS returns and can be retroactive till July 1st, 2023. Please note that if we receive the request and it does not have the CCS or the CCS's agency supervisor's signature on it, we will have to send it back for request for additional information, as that attestation and signature is required. But please note again that the request can be submitted and approved with a retroactive date up to July 1st, 2023. And if you need additional assistance, please reach out to the regional office or again, the CCS's supervisor. Next question. Can I apply for exemption to DDA direct without going through the CCS? Great question. Again, the process that we had put in place was that the CCS to facilitate the request. If you submit the request on their behalf, we will need all the required documents and including the CCS attestation signature. The preference is this would be submitted by the CCS. Our next question. Residency documents are for the caregiver or both caregiver and the person? Great question. The residency documents are for the caregiver. It's to verify that the caregiver's address matches the participants. Next question, upload in LTSS where? Another great question. Our CCSs, or coordinators of community services, are to upload the documents into the person's client attachment section. If you're a CCS and need additional assistance in terms of navigating to this area, please reach out to the regional office or your supervisor who could further support you in these efforts. The next question. We have a support broker, but the ARC has not noted this on the participant dashboard or paid them. Will this affect the live-in caregiver application? Great question. No. The ARC setting up or the FMCS setup related to a support broker will have no effect in terms of the request. If you have a support broker and they're included in your team, please make sure that the CCS is aware and that they note them in the request form. This way, they will be able to receive the notification related to the exemption and be able to better support you. Again, we will need their email address in order for them to receive the notification. Okay. Another question asking about where to upload in LTSS. Again, this is going to be in the client attachments. Next question. How can we ensure the documents are kept in a secure location? There are a lot going on in concerns of the internet security. Having to send this information annually increases the risk. Great question. We are utilizing the department's tools and resources, which are HIPAA compliant and secure. We do everything to support confidentiality related to the information and the security of the information. Next question. What does EVV stand for? EVV stands for Electronic Visit Verification. Our earlier slides shows this information and provides a detailed description related to EVV. Next question. Who tells the FMCS when we are approved? Another great question. The DDA will send notification of approval to the FMCS. In addition, we will be providing a listing for them so that they have an accurate and up-to-date listing at all times. Next question. My children provide respite through self-direction. However, they don't have any utilities or any of the documents in their names except for Real ID. Is there any other document that would be acceptable? Great question. Let's reach out and connect, and we can explore what opportunities there are related to your children that are providing respite. Next question. Is this form also on the self-directed website? Actually, the forms are all listed on the DDA website for EVV, or electronic visit verification. When you visit the DDA website, there will be a panel at the top, and one of them includes electronic visit verification. Next question. Will we be sent a request for renewal when the year is up? Great question. Absolutely. We will send a renewal notice 60 days prior to the expiration date of the approval of the exemption. Again, our documents and our guidance, we're requesting that you submit that request 30 days prior to the expiration, so we make sure that we can have that process and the FMCS provider notified so that there's no disruption in that. But we will send you a notice 60 days before the expiration date. Next question. Many live-in caregivers stop clocking in and out in real time as of July 1st, because that's the date DDA said the exemption started. Can they continue manually adding shifts? Great question. Yes, we have sent out some information and clarification related to the guidance that was previously noted. I would recommend that the live-in caregiver exemption request be submitted, noting the effective date of July 1st, so that we can have that and notify of the approval for the FMCS. Next question. So none of this applies to CFC, correct? Great question. Today we are talking about the DDA operated Medicaid waiver programs. That includes the Family Supports Waiver, Community Supports Waiver, and Community Pathways Waiver. People who may be enrolled in other department or Medicaid programs will need to also look at the process for an exemption if they're seeking that under CFC services. The Office of Long-Term Services and Supports is working with the support planner agencies for the Community First Choice program and will be providing guidance and processes for that program. Again, today, this process is the DDA's process for the Family Supports Waiver, Community Supports Waiver, and Community Pathways Waiver. Okay, going down, next questions. Are we allowed to go back to using Paycom or paper timesheets? The EV system is slow and cumbersome. No, you will need to use the ARC's electronic billing system. We are not going back to Paycom or paper timesheets. Please follow up with the participant and the ARC for any questions or support that you may need. When doing the manual entry, are we to use EVV? Not required for this. So, great question. If you're talking about EVV, the electronic visit verification, then you will not have to use the real-time clock in and clock out. If you're self-directing, you will still need to do the electronic billing process of the FMCS. Question, why would this have to be done every year instead of only if there are any changes? The living caregiver is the parent. Why wouldn't they just be an automatic exception? Great question. The process and the guidance that we have set up is based on the department's guidance and policy. So we will be doing an annual review just to confirm and support this exemption process. Going down. How does signing the attestation form work? Does the CCS send it to the participant's email, then caregiver email using DocuSign? Great question. The CCS will facilitate the attestation form and the signature of it. CCS may use various tools for electronic signature, including DocuSign. You can follow up with the CCS to confirm the process that will be used. Next question. How do providers handle billing through the new process? There is information and guidance that are available on our website related to the provider process. Providers currently can utilize a manual time entry process, and additional information will be provided as we move towards respite implementation. Please note, traditional provided service delivery model now has the option to use the new ISAS application that can help support more flexibility for clocking in and clocking out. Please refer to the LTSS billing unit so that they can provide additional support and answer any additional questions you have. Next question. Does living caregiver refer to living caregiver services, or does it also include family members that are paid staff that live in the same household? Great question. Living caregiver are referring to the caregivers that live in the home that are providing personal support or respite care services. It is different than the waiver standalone service for living caregiver supports, which provides an option to support the cost of the rent and a food subsidy for a living caregiver. Next question. Do residential employees have to use the EVV system? Great question. No, for electronic visit verification, the only two services that are required under the DDA operated programs is personal supports and respite care services. Next question. How will living caregivers that are exempt submit time? Another great question. Living caregivers will need to follow up with the person and the Financial Management and Counseling Service Agency, if they're self-directing, for instructions and guidance on their options for submitting their time. Under the traditional service delivery model, caregivers, known as staff for the person, should follow up with their agency to understand and follow the guidance for how they're to clock in. Next question. Will the living caregiver exemptions eventually be handled with the FMCS? Great question. No, we have standardized the process so that one request form is used for all to utilize, and we will be notifying the FMCSs of the approved. Next question. We need to attest to being a living caregiver, and also if we want an EVV exemption, so for two separate issues. Great question. Yes, so attesting that you are a living caregiver at that address and that exception is being requested. Remember, the person drives the process and makes the decision, so they would be the one making the request for the exemption for their living caregiver. Next question. If the living caregiver does not use EVV, how will DDA know services are being provided? Great question. Again, the person is the one who is making decision and oversees their services. They should be reviewing time, whether it's a living caregiver or other staff or other services, and approving them based on the delivery of services. The team process is also very important. And so when the living caregiver is a relative, under the waiver renewal, A support broker is required to support quality assurance and to review any conflicts of interest. So it's important for the team to be supporting the participant, who is the decision maker and driving services, to ensure that they're receiving all services regardless of who the person is that's providing it. Next question. Can a CCS bill for completion of these forms? CCSs would be providing the service as a CCS activity, and it is a billable item. Next question. When individuals are exempted, per the process discussed, do agencies enter time into LTSS manually? Yes, that is an option that you can do. If so, are those claims subject to manual MDH approval? Yes, we will be providing a list of approved caregivers and the participants to the Medicaid provider services, and they will be checking that on manual time entry. Next question related to this thread is, it's important for agencies to know how and when they get paid. So the process would be the same for manual time entries, and manual approvals can take some time. So I suggest if you have concerns or questions related to manual time entry, to follow up with the Medicaid provider services. We've included on the last slide related to questions and resources. Their email address is listed there. Next question. Can a support broker assist with this process? Absolutely. A support broker can assist with this process, and other team members can too. Next question. We have a few family members who are living caregivers and work on a rotation basis. Do we have to complete several forms to ask for approval for each family member? Great question. Yes, the form is set up to be a request per living caregiver. So you would want to submit a request form for each person that the participant is seeking for the exemption. Next question. If approved, when reporting time, can we use both real time and after the shift? Absolutely. With the exemption, caregivers can still use real-time clock in and clock out using the application from the FMCS or the traditional provider system. So that's absolutely an option. And you can also provide information after their shift or later as per the participant self-directing's guidance or the traditional provider. Next question. You've explained the procedure for requesting exemption. What criteria does DDA use to determine whether to approve or deny the exemption? For example, are staff denied based on billing history and or the results of background check? Great question. The DDA's guidance on EVV living caregiver exemption is noted on our website and included in our resource slide. In the guidance, we note the standards for approval. We do not look at billing history and we do not look at background checks. We will approve requests where the effective date is July 1st or later, where the attestation form and request forms are completed, including all signatures, and when the residency address matches the participant, and that 2 proofs of residency documents are provided. This is outlined in the guidance. We will deny the request if any of those elements are not present or confirmed. Prior to any denial, the DDA will send a request for additional information and clarification to the CCS, the person, and the living caregiver to try to remediate any concerns so that we can approve those requests. Next question. Regarding verification documents. For example, do you documents with the name and address of the living caregiver? Yes, the documents that we needs to reflect the name of the caregiver and their address as verification that it is matching the person's address. Okay, we're getting some repeat questions, so we'll just move forward. How and when will a company's personal support staff be configured with the new EVV app? Great question. Additional information has been coming out through the Medicaid provider services, and we'll be providing and sharing more information related to provider service opportunities under the traditional model to use the EVV application. Next question, please confirm this only affects individuals in personal supports and respite care and is not applicable to the living caregiver support service. Yes, we are confirming that the EVV living caregiver exemption applies for only personal supports and respite care services. The waiver standalone service, referred to as living caregiver supports, that provides funding to offset the rent and food allowance, is not part of electronic visit verification. Next question, can an employee use the EVV system after approval from the waiver? An employee can use the EVV system based on approval of the participant enrolled in the waiver and their plan. So we want to follow up with the participant in the CCS. Next question. You stated that EVV is required for personal supports and respite care. What about community development services? Isn't it required for that as well? No, community development services is not required under electronic visit verification for personal supports and respite. Okay. Is a passport an acceptable document to submit? Yes, a passport is acceptable. Next question, what services have to use EVV system? Again, the two DDA services are personal supports and respite care. Next question, if there are two parents who live in caregivers, do they need to submit two forms? Yes, for each living caregiver, a request should be submitted with the supporting documentation. Next question. How long is the time logged for living caregivers if not using the EVV system? I'm not sure I understand the question, but once the exemption request has been approved, it's valid for a 1-year period from the approval date. Next question. What is the annual meeting already took place? Can the attestation form still be completed? Absolutely. The person should reach out to their CCS to let them know that they're interested in exploring and requesting an EVV living caregiver exemption. That can then be completed as per the process we're sharing today. Next question, do we have to have the caregiver exemption? No, you do not have to do the living caregiver exemption. Living caregivers can continue to clock in and clock out in real time using the system and process they're using today. Today, we're providing the option, if the person so chooses, to have the exemption for their caregiver in using the real-time clock in, clock out electronic visit verification. How does it work when you have several participants? I'm not sure I understand quite that question, but again, the process is for a living caregiver, meaning they live with the participant. So if you have several participants living in the same home, maybe siblings, then that would work. Okay. Will data be available from the EVV app, be exportable into a company's external timekeeping system? Great question. We'll refer that to Medicaid provider services, and additional information will be shared as they share more information about their EVV application. Next question. We are having a problem with family caregivers taking tracking for the clients. Is there anything the exemption that addresses this issue? I think it's important, if you have concerns related to any staff or caregiver, that that be shared with the team and explored options to remediate those concerns. If you have specific people or individuals, please reach out to the DDA regional office. They can facilitate further discussion and review. Our goal absolutely is to support the person, to make sure they're getting quality services at the right time, and supporting their health and welfare and their goals and outcomes to their good life. Next question. Is there any specific information that can be given to those live-in caregivers requesting exemption for the CFC program? Please contact your support planning agency who provides case management under the Community First Choice program, who can provide additional information and support for that process. Getting questions about the client attachments. Yes, that's where it will be posted. Next question, does this process apply to licensed group home with a live-in caregiver? No, this process applies only to personal supports and respite care services. It does not apply to community living group home services. Next question, I work for my son with community. My question is, do I still need to clock in with EVV? So it's really important, if you're providing personal supports or respite care services, those are the two services that are required to have the electronic visit verification, real-time clock in and clock out. If you're providing community development services or other services, the real-time clock in and clock out is not required by the department. However, it may be required by your agency if you're working as a staff member. So you should follow up with them or the person self-directing. Next question, will this help us in getting paid on a timely fashion? This process is not associated with payment. If you're having concerns or questions about payment, please reach out to the FMCS or the traditional provider as applicable. Next question, should the CCS provide copy of the person's LTSS attachment section so a person can verify that the required attachment has been successfully uploaded? No, that would not be needed to show that the documents have been uploaded. We can do a cross-check within our system. Next question, what are some of the possible reasons a request for an exemption might not be approved? Great question. Again, as I stated earlier, we will first do a follow-up request for additional information and clarification if there's any missing information. We will also follow up if the request was made for a date prior to July 1st, 2023. We will do a request for information if we're missing the attestation form or missing 2 proofs of residency. And we'll also do a request for information if the address does not match for the participants. Next question. I work with a minor whose parents are divorced and she lives in 2 households. The live-in caregiver is not the household that is used for legal purposes such as schooling. How would we request this exemption? Please reach out to us at the DDA EVV at maryland.gov email, and we can support you through this process after we get additional information. Next question, how many proofs of residency are needed? Great question. We are seeking 2 proofs of residency. Next question, does that mean that the support information has to be sent to the CCS for them to upload? This seems to add another area of information exposure. Please note that the CCS, as a business agreement with the department, has to ensure confidentiality related to information. So they will support that in a protected and confidential manner. Question, in the traditional model, how will a provider bill for services provided by a live-in caregiver exempted from EVV? The traditional provider's business model in terms of billing should be utilized. The ISAS process provides the opportunity for manual time entry if real-time clock in and clock out is not used. And the new traditional side ISAS web application will provide more flexibility. Additional questions and assistance can be obtained by reaching out to Medicaid Provider Services at the email address listed on the contact slide. Next question, can you review again how live-in caregivers clock in and clock out? So in general, I would say live-in caregivers can, if you're under the self-directed model, would utilize the financial management and counseling services electronic billing system. In the electronic billing system, there are different options based on the services. For personal supports and respite, it requires electronic visit verification in real-time clock in and clock out. If a request to be exempt is being submitted for the live-in caregiver and it is approved, then the person can go into the portal, the electronic billing system and portal of the FMCS, to log their time. That can be done at the end of the shift, at the end of the week, at the end of the pay period. You'll want to check with the participant and make sure that the process is being followed based on their present as they drive those decisions. Under the traditional model, you should follow up with your provider and supervisor on the process and tools that you will be using for clocking in and clocking out. Next question. So this exemption does not include the community services, only personal supports and respite. That is correct. EVV live-in caregiver exemption is only related to personal supports and respite. Personal supports and respite care are the only two DDA waiver services that require EVV. Next question. There's another question about payment. Please again reach out to your provider or your FMCS related to any payments concerns, or the regional office if you need additional assistance. Next question, are family of staff eligible to be exempt in the exemption request? To clarify, the only two services we're talking about is personal supports and respite. So if the family is a live-in caregiver, meaning they live at the same address as the person, and is providing personal supports or respite care, then an exemption request can be made. If a family as staff is providing CDS, or a family of staff is providing personal supports but does not live with the person, then the exemption request would not be approved. Next question. If you apply for and receive an exemption, can you still do real-time clock in and out for some of the shifts in addition to some manual entries? What a great question. Absolutely. You can continue to do real-time clock in and clock out for some of your shifts in addition to manual entries once the exemption request is approved. Next question. Should the CCS also email the regional office to let them know the forms are in the client attachment? No, that action is not needed. How long does it take to hear requests have been approved? Great question. We have noted in our guidance it will take 20 days or less. Again, we've already received requests today and have approved them. So we've got a team that will be monitoring those requests and making those determinations as soon as possible. It's important that the request include the required information because we can quickly check and make an approval decision on that. So having it complete when it's submitted will help us to be extremely responsive. The individual does not want to apply for exemption for their staff. Are staff allowed to apply anyway? Or is the individual's choice final in this case? Great question. The person is the person who drives the services and makes the decision. So it is the person who would be making that request and will be signing off on the attestation. So the staff who may be seeking that cannot apply absent the person's choice and decision to do that. Next question, where in LTSS can the CCS find the LTSS upload checklist? Great question. The LTSS checklist is noted on the DDA exemption request. So you'll look at that and scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the checklist. We've also noted that on one of our slides that you can refer back to. Is there a lapse in an expiration and it's approved, will it be retroactive? Great question. Requests can be submitted with a retroactive date of July 1st, 2023. So we will accept those and approve those. There will be no lapse in the expiration provided that the annual renew request is submitted timely and approved. Next question, where do you find the LTSS ID? Great question. Please coordinate with your coordinator of community services. They have the LTSS ID and can facilitate that. Please define a live-in caregiver. Great question. So on our earlier slides, we shared information related to a live-in caregiver. So live-in caregiver are individuals that live with the person and regularly provide personal support services or respite to them in their home. Do budgets need to be updated in order to raise the pay of employees? Great question. Information will need to be shared and updated with the FMCS for raises. The question, can an agency with a live-in caregiver continue to use EVV? Yes, absolutely. Okay, just going down to see. If you have questions related to service codes in the FMCS system, please follow up with the FMCS. Request to email the wonderful presentation. Absolutely, the presentation is in the right panel. You can download and you can request it from Donna if you didn't receive it. Question about what happens when the living caregivers are divorced and parents and both provide self-directed support services in two separate homes. Please reach out to us so that we could have further discussion and support that so that we can have that exemption for both homes. What is the deadline for completion of the required exemption form? Great question. There is no deadline. The exemption request form can be submitted at any time. Decisions can be made next month, in 6 months. It can happen at any time. So there's no required time frame. However, if you're seeking an exemption today or as of July 1st, you'll need to submit that request so that we can review and approve it. So I believe we are at our time. We really appreciate all the great questions and the opportunity to meet with you today to share information. The handout PowerPoint presentation with the information is noted in the panel. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us at the dda.evv@maryland.gov. We look forward to supporting this great opportunity for participants who are seeking live-in caregiver exemptions. Thank you and have a great day.